Thank you very much, Greg. You did what we asked you to do. You did it well. We're open now for some questions from any of the brethren that would like to ask.
None are necessary.
Austin.
Thank you, Greg. That was very good. I really appreciated it. You mentioned there towards the end about recommendation letters for preachers.
Yeah.
It seems to me that in Acts 15, prior to that, prior to the, I don't want to call it the showdown, but the discussion, the church at Antioch commissioned, it seems, Paul and Barnabas, and it says certain others there, to go to Jerusalem. They selected them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm of the opinion, I'm a big believer in recommendation letters. I have a couple myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think churches ought to get more comfortable writing letters.
Mm-hmm.
At least have a template, or you can buy little books at the bookstore to help you write letters if you're not comfortable. But
Mm-hmm.
it seems to me that in the interest of congregational cooperation, the more letters that we have, where we have not just men going off on their own whims, if you will, and I'm saying this purely hypothetical, not just individuals who say, well, I've decided I'm going to go over here, but congregations say, we have selected these men to figure this thing out. And similarly, Jerusalem selected, they commissioned Judas and Silas. I don't think it's any wonder that they're referred to as leading men.
Yes.
The words hageomai, it's found in Hebrews 13 as well, about leaders there. So you're right. I do think there are leaders in that sense. So I kind of wondered what you thought about that, maybe in a little bit more depth. Because another interesting thing too, I have so many thoughts. I don't want to ramble, but it says that at the conclusion of this, they all they were of one accord. They were of one mind. They came to this decision unanimously. And sometimes I think what hinders church cooperation, congregational cooperation, I should say, is that too often we're focused on being right. Who's right or rightest, rather than figuring out how to solve the problem and put aside ego. There are very few things, I think, that we could say confidently, maybe to our shame, that we've arrived at this unanimously. So I was wondering, I primarily bring up the recommendation letter and having more of them, what you think of that.
Now, having been at multiple congregations through the decades, there have been times, had I requested a letter of recommendation, I would have been told, I don't think so. I don't think so. That's going to happen. And when you say, no, I'm turned down for a letter of recommendation, that's when you write your own and you sign their names. No, you don't do that. That's when you write to explain, because if we're going to be transparent in the brotherhood, it's like, yeah, I'm leaving because we had a dispute over this or this or this. And they can attest to the truth of that or not, but this is why I'm at your doorstep, and if you don't want me, I'll move on. But so many times congregations will say, oh yeah, we're so glad to get rid of you. We'll give you that letter of recommendation. Brother and sister so-and-so have been here for X number of years. We hope you welcome them with open arms. That's not a letter of recommendation at all. Because we need to know, when someone comes to our congregation, we need to know, are there issues where you've been that you need to make right? Were the leaders of that congregation trying to work with you about problems in your life and you're running from those? Then we don't want you to stop here. We want you to go back and straighten those things up, and either stay there having straightened those things up, or then come back and we'll welcome you with that letter of recommendation. So whenever a letter is involved, I think it's fine for people to request one. I don't think it's something that we demand, because I don't know that we would get one in every case, but I do think it could be appropriate to start that transparency. And that's my issue here. If we're going to solve problems, we have to be willing to be transparent with who we are with where we have been and where we're going and why. Now, your second thing was,
It was about being of one mind and unanimous decision. Sometimes
okay,
more.
I know why I forgot that. Even the discipline of Corinth was administered by the many. It was not delivered unanimously, even though ordered by an apostle. Now, there is some thought that the relatives were excused from that, the wife in particular, or the children. Nevertheless, we can only do the best we can, and we would hope for unanimity with all of these things, but if that is not the case, then that is not the case. We still have to go forward as best we can.
Thank you so much for that presentation, brother. I just thought that was very even-handed, and every question I had written down about Acts 15 and how we handle those kind of situations and also respect autonomy, you answered all of them. So
Okay.
thank you. I'd just like to say, relating to Acts 18 and the recommendation letters, as a young preacher, that is such a wonderful thing to have.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because there's been times past where the strategy for a young man who wants to preach is to just throw him out there,
Mm-hmm.
put him on the draft list, see who wants to pick him up. And speaking for my situation, to have the elders here at 21st Street and the whole congregation in my corner, and they're sending me out, they're concerned where I'm going, and they give their recommendation, it just means the world. And I think that's God's plan.
Well, it is comforting, and it's also, it protects everyone. It protects you, because when somebody says, "Where are you from?" Here you go. Here's where I'm from. And you can, and I've even had preachers announce, I've heard people announce, now if there's anything that comes up that you think you need to talk to somebody about me, here's my home congregation, here's who recommends me to the brotherhood, and feel free to talk to them about any concern that you have. Now that's an openness, and that's a transparency. And someone may call the leaders at Westview at Piedmont and say, "You know, Greg's outfit, his tie didn't match his shirt at all." It's like, and they'll say, "That's a serious problem. We'll talk to him about it as soon as he gets home."
As a follow-up, a question prior to this study on my mind. As you know, many denominations will look at this, and they call it the First Council of Jerusalem, right?
Yes. Mhm.
And we have to ask the question, if we're dealing with problems larger than a local congregation, and we take this approach, what separates us from a synod or from a council or something like that? And I think, honestly, it's the recommendation letter, because it's saying, these are the people who I report to. They are in charge. They have given me their permission, their blessing, whatever you want to say.
Mhm.
And if I act in a way that's unbecoming, if I act in a way, then they are the ones that appropriately take care of me,
Mhm.
right? So, for whatever that's worth.
There's some very interesting nuances in all of that, because it wasn't the mother church that initiated the action. It was another congregation that was down the line. So it's like, how dare an inferior number 10 church ask a question of the number 1 church? Well, it makes no difference what sequence. We may be church number 10,000. We're still autonomous and have every responsibility as the first congregation. And you also have, instead of Peter making all of the decisions, James ultimately is the one who said, this is my judgment. And so you have every reason to discount the popular reporting of that meeting and what it accomplished and why it came to pass.
Thank you, Brother Greg. In Matthew 18, you have the principles brought over from the Old Testament, 2 or 3 witnesses.
Yeah.
I would point out that in cases of sexual abuse in the Old Testament, that principle did not apply.
Oh.
I'll add to that, when you have 2 or 3 witnesses, that has to mean something in the church.
Yeah.
Talked to a young man the other day, and he was saying, I don't know what to believe. One person says this, one person says, Where are the witnesses? You got 2 or 3 witnesses, God stands with the witnesses, let alone 9. Witnesses have to mean something in the church. We're not detectives, as Jonathan talked to us about.
Mm-hmm.
That's the police's job. But as church leaders, we are commanded to listen to the faithful witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
That has to mean something. I appreciate what you had to say about transparency. It's amazing, major church problem, Acts 15, transparency by God on what happened in the situation.
Yeah.
And we have to have transparency as leaders in our lives to be above board. And I have software on my phone to be transparent, to be above board for the sake of my reputation and my relationship with my wife. We can go above and beyond to make sure we are what we're supposed to be. I want to say just a note to parents. You mentioned secrets with children.
Yeah.
We try to practice not having secrets in our family. We may surprise at a birthday party, but we don't have secrets because we don't want our children thinking it's okay to have secrets or to keep secrets from parents or from adults. We don't keep secrets. And I would also recommend to parents to train your children to scream when they're in uncomfortable situations. You have to practice that. It's not natural to scream in a large audience when you're around people. Sexual abuse can occur in a crowd.
Yeah.
Jimmy Hinton's father molested children at services in front of their parents.
Yeah.
You have to teach children to scream and to speak up. When a child screams, everybody starts paying attention. We can sort out what the screaming's about later. But when they're in difficult situations, they need to have an out. That's something we can do.
So these are practical things that help us be who we're supposed to be and help everyone else beware. So let's just say that, for example, the congregation has a child molester that's part of this congregation. The conversation goes something like this: we love you. God loves you. We want to be with you in heaven. In the meantime, here are some safeguards that we're going to have for you. We're going to tell every family with children that you have had this problem in your past. And every family will know. And when you come to worship, here's where we would like for you to sit. And we would like for you to arrive at this time, and we would like for you to leave at this time. And understand that no amount of time with any of our children is ever going to be appropriate for you. And if someone says, well, I just have to be able to circulate among the children, that is when you say, dear brother, leave this congregation and never come back. Here's a congregation with no children. We recommend you go there and understand everything that we know about you will be told to them when you go. Because we will not allow our children to be approached by you or to be vulnerable by you. Now, let's say it's a preacher who's a womanizer. And you think, well, no preacher's womanizers. Yeah, some dead, some living. So here's the way that conversation goes. Now again, this is all pretend and you can adapt it to your needs, but it's like, dear brother, you give my wife the creeps when you're around her. So here's what I want you to do. You can shake hands with her briefly. Don't you hold her hand. And if you do anything that she's uncomfortable with, I have asked her to scream loudly and to kick you into the middle of next week. You can guess where that is. Now, that preacher may say, woo, I'm never coming back there again. It's like, that works for me. That works for me. When a preacher leaves town after a member of the community tells you that he was inappropriate with his wife, do you let the next congregation know or not? And if you don't, you're setting up the next person. And if someone has bothered children and you know about it, and you've not let the next congregation know if they choose to go on, what have you done? You've enabled them to go on and practice their evil. At best, we are all tempted to do things we shouldn't do. But it seems to me the pattern at Corinth was, for those who are members of that congregation, everyone knew everything about those members, and it was for their own protection. And no, it wasn't a scarlet letter that everybody wore. It was for the protection of the congregation who had not committed those sins, and it was for the motivation and protection of those who had. And if I walked in and I'd say, okay, I'm the thief, how are you going to help me? Well, if you have me over, you're not going to set your jewelry out next to the table where you're feeding me, are you? And if I'm an idolater, you're not going to tell me, oh, I got this meat down at the local idol shop. We're going to protect each other. And when the leaders know about these things and don't share them with the families in the congregation, they're only continuing the problems. And guaranteed, anyone who is a child molester or molester of any way, anyone who is a womanizer, is all about appearing to be the most wonderful person in the world. And leaders have to be able to see through that, because this person is a wolf in sheep's clothing, about to prey on the innocent in your family or in your congregation. Let's stop the nightmares that children will have and the scars that people have in their lives because people were not brave enough to be transparent and to demand transparency for those who had known sins.
Greg, you mentioned a quotation from Carl Johnson early on, where he explained that not having transparency in dealing with situations of this magnitude or this kind amounted to what in modern parlance is called cover-up. And we know of situations where a letter of recommendation is really not going to solve the problem. We know of situations where a child molester is being protected by elders in a congregation, and you want to talk to them and present the material of 3 victims and 6 corroborative witnesses, and they won't hear it. Well, it's true. We can't force them to hear it or hear us. We have to go on our way and do something else. But people seem to be of the notion, some people seem to be of the notion that there's just no way to correct elders of another congregation. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. The first preacher or the first church leader that ever took me on a Bible study was Linda Cutter's father, Melvin Crouch. Mm-hmm. And there was a discussion one time, I remember, I don't know, this must have been 55 years ago, something like that, about how you would correct, I think the context was an evangelist. Who had the authority to correct this evangelist? And first, one person said one thing and another person, is debate going back and forth. And Melvin, who didn't say many words anyway, most of us who knew him know that, said, I'll tell you who can correct him. Any Christian with a Bible in his hand can correct him. Mm-hmm. Well, now, I've remembered that several times through the years, and I think that's right. Elders are as subject to correction by people with a Bible, and especially in a case where you're talking about sexual abuse or something of that nature, where you've got not just 2 or 3 witnesses, but 9, it has to be stopped. Because when people are protecting someone like that, other congregations who have no idea are calling this person to come to them, and they have no idea what's going on. And if they did, they might make another decision that's a lot safer. I just wondered if you had a comment about that.
So we can become partakers of others' evil deeds, and sometimes the motivation for us to do that is we just don't want to get involved. And so Carl's remarks were very apt. It's like, don't take too long to correct an erring elder. You've got to get it done. You've got to be as sure as you can, but it has to happen. So anytime something like this happens, we do not know what to do. But let's go back to our scenario to where the Antioch people came to Jerusalem, and let's pretend they were listened to, but nothing was going to be done. And now it's time for Antioch to go back home. What does Antioch do? I'll guarantee you we can figure out what Antioch does. What Antioch does is retrace the path of those Judaizing teachers, and they tell everyone about the Judaizing teachers, and they tell everyone about the leadership of the congregation in Jerusalem. So we sometimes do not cooperate with congregations among us because of decisions like this. We cannot pretend that all is well. If Jerusalem said, those are good guys, we're not going to do anything about that. That's their choice, but the sword of autonomy cuts both ways. They can decide not to do anything, and the Antioch leaders can decide to tell the world. Now, we're very reluctant to do that, and I know that. We're susceptible to lawsuit and to complaint and being called more names. A preacher among us who did great and mighty, wonderful things many, many, many years was Irvin Waters. And he did great things with us and for us right up to the minute that he stopped. And then he cooperated with those who worship in error, and he did so for the rest of his life. And it was probably at least 20 years after his departure from us before his name was mentioned in one of our publications. Now, why are we so reluctant to do that? Because that's just not what we do. Mark and avoid means you know who's marked and you know who to avoid. And whenever someone is marked and avoided, they may correct that later. And look at what Paul did with Mark, the gospel writer. He marked Mark for all of us to know that he had turned tail and ran. And whenever Paul says, send Mark to me, for he's profitable for me in the ministry, that was about 20 years later. But when someone was marked like Mark, everywhere he went, and he didn't leave the church, but everywhere he went, it's like, oh, you're the one that left Paul and Barnabas in the lurch. And he had to explain that probably for the rest of his life. And that's a consequence of being marked, only you eventually learn that he has made those things right and he's not to be avoided. So in our circles, whenever a congregation says, well, you can do what you want to, we're autonomous. Autonomous does not mean secret. Autonomous means, okay, we'll retrace the route where we've come if we're Antioch, and we'll tell everybody what your decision is. And we pray that very soon we will be able to go back with a different message. And then we go on. We tell what has happened, we report truthfully, and we does not mean we hate them, it means we love them with all of our hearts. But as much as we may love each other, we love the Lord more. And we will protect the church. And we will walk hundreds of miles if necessary to do it. I'd prefer to ride in a car, thank you. We will put out that effort. And every preacher here will or should not be preaching.
Brother Greg, 20 years went by before Irvin Waters' name was mentioned. There's two preachers that we've been preaching about during this week's meeting, and their name has not been mentioned yet. Why not?
because someone has to have the courage to do that. And because it's not always easy when it's people we know and love. And at some point, a judgment call has to be made. How long do we go before someone is corrected? Now, Corinth went too long before, in fact, they did not correct the immoral brother that was sleeping with his stepmother. And Paul said, you waited too long. Can we act too quickly? I believe we can. Can we wait too long? I believe we can. Somewhere in between is a judgment call. And I would like to think that before we mark someone to avoid them, that we would do our best with the influence we have to gather all of those forces to say, please, brother, please, sister, do what's right before we publicly say who they are. That's a judgment call. That's a tough call. I named Irving when I took them out of the directory. I'm still waiting for apologies from many around the Brotherhood who said vile things to me. I didn't get called the Antichrist, though. But so, yes, we do reach a point where we will say, here's the names. Who makes that call? Who has the right to make that call? I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to do it too soon. I don't want to do it too late. But I am willing to bear that burden because I have done it in the past. And so, somebody else has a thought about that? I'd be glad to hear it.
Do you have a concluding remark you want to make?
These are so hard. The words like this are so hard. And I've said some things that just really are difficult to say, and I know they're even more difficult to hear. But what I want to leave us with is hope, because we can do this successfully. We can be successful in overcoming problems in our individual lives, in our families, in our congregations, and when there's a problem that's larger than one congregation. We can do this because we are people of the book. And as long as we trust God and have the faith to do what He says, we will get through this. But it's not a twitch your nose and it's all done. It's a hard journey. And you just think about walking 300 miles to see if somebody will talk to you. So we're going to plod along, and it may seem like we're not going very fast to do many things, but I trust that everyone will recognize that leaders in our congregations and gospel preachers that we know and love, we're doing the best we can to help everyone as much as we can. And I thank you for your very patient, respectful listening.